I'm going to take a roll call. Gabe Paulson,
Yes.
Catherine Way,
I'll abstain, I wasn't here.
Daniel Kinsler,
I don't believe I was there last meeting.
and Brock Wagstaff.
Yes.
That's only 2 of 4. I don't think you have to be 10 to approve the minutes. If anyone wants to vote yes for us, we can approve them.
Okay, I did read it, but so I will approve.
Okay, thank you.
I wasn't here, but read it.
All right, and then the next item is review of the draft objective design and development standards for multifamily property. And make a recommendation to the planning commission and city council. And so. We have our consultants here who prepared a new version of. This document, and I'm going to be happy to turn it over to you if you want to introduce yourselves to. This, not everyone here knows you. And I guess start by maybe if you could start it all by saying what might have changed since the last document, or if there's a way to summarize it.
Okay, so I'm David Mazington. I'm from ELS Architecture. We are working with EFC Planning. Andy, who you know, is working on the housing element, and Urban Field Studio. Brian called and can't be here tonight. And sort of together, we have been working on taking the Marin County odds that were designed as a toolkit for the entire Marin and tried to make them applicable to Larkspur. The original odds document was 360 pages. We've got about 200 pages after that. We've done that through kind of fundamentally changing the way that we think about the odds. The original odds were designed basically to preference architectural style. So a developer would come in and they would say, well, I have to pick either a craftsman or a Tudor or a contemporary, and then you would move forward with the typology. We've kind of put that to the dustbin and we looked at current Larkspur building form, which, you know, the rhythm of the houses, the typical setbacks in the side and the front, because when you go around a city, it's not so much the architecture, it's really kind of the scale and the setbacks that tells you what the place is like. So we've done it as a form-based code approach where you can actually, where we deal with setbacks and building height, and the way the confronts the street and how the parking is handled in terms of whether it's in front or back, and how hillsides are dealt with. Obviously, Larkspur have a lot of those. And so we've reshaped the odds to make it simpler, and we'll protect the city, I think, from getting really bad examples of Tudor architecture. You know, the problem with that odds is that anyone that wants to take the SB 35 route will choose on those, and they'll do it as cheaply as possible. And the outcome, you know, it'll be as cheap as possible. It'll be as cheap as possible. So we're trying to give better guidelines that will give the flexibility to do market rate and affordable housing, but do it in a way that meets the current Larkspur building form, which I will say, I mean, Larkspur is a very diverse community in terms of building form. I mean, you have what's over by the ferry and Marine Country Mart, you have what's downtown here, you have the residential suburbs, you have a very modern tower, you have a modern tower, you have a lot of 50s and 60s buildings, you know, you've got the bar building over the parking. You have it all. You know, we've looked at other communities that you could probably, you know, on one hand count all the building the architectural types. That's not the case here in Larkspur, so we had to do something that's pretty wide range. So what I thought I would do today is do a run through of the zones and kind of what's allowed in the zones in terms of massing. I was going to re-show, for those that weren't here last time, our case studies on 4 different existing properties and how the odds would view them, whether they're compliant or not. And then we look at one particular example, which is the grocery site. With groceries and Lucky. We're looking at a Lucky site.
Excellent.
That's Lucky. And we're going to kind of walk through how a developer would pick that up and use the odds. So sort of a demonstration. I'm hoping this is kind of like I'm hoping this is a workshop. So
Okay, I don't want to go too far ahead, but the last meeting I attended, the emphasis was really on using materials as kind of a lever to incent developers to basically resolve off.
that's a good way to put it. I mean, doing that's harder, easier said than done, obviously.
Okay, but is that still close to the top of the list?
I think the entire goal of this is to provide standards that will raise the bar for developers, but also meet the requirements of the city to have objective standards. Now, any developer could come in and they can bypass these, they can submit for discretionary review. Like it's currently done, and they can go through that process. Obviously, that has a lot of pitfalls in terms of timing, so, will people choose the SB 35 route? I don't know. If you go SB 35, you have to go prevailing wage on construction, and that could be a deal killer. We just don't know. So,
Say that the way it's set up, projects that are subject to the Housing Accountability Act are also fall under these.
yep,
So essentially, if it was a market rate project, that would be, I think, the only way that someone could get out of. I think the housing accountability applies to affordable too. I'd have to check, but the way, we don't have anything yet that gives anyone an out of the standards if they're doing multifamily. But that's something that we could put in the ordinance that other cities have considered.
that's interesting. Yes, worth
It
discussion.
depends on how the ordinance, I guess, is drafted.
Right. So, our goal here with the odds is really defining, the frontages and the design site size, the building height, the setbacks, the encroachments, the parking, the building massing, accessory buildings, open space, all that stuff, but we're trying to do it in a very form-based approach. I think, when we originally looked at it, it was, there's a lot of work to get through, like if you were actually a developer trying to get through that odd, so we tried to simplify it. Just in these pretty basic steps, trying to introduce you to the process. You do what's called find your zone, which I'll show you a map in a second that shows all of the zones across Larkspur. And then from that zone, you branch off into the book and you find your site size and you proceed that way, and we'll walk through how that works. The original document for Marin had a total of 8 different zone types. We only picked 4 of them. We picked from basically the smallest residential scale up to the T5 core Main Street, which is the one down here. And that's just for, near the ferry and all the transit oriented development. So how that shakes out is like this. And what I've done with this is I've aligned your current zoning on the right, so you can see how that zone coincides with the zones on the left. So the lightest yellow is the least intense. That's the T3. It's a very single family residential type feeling zone. The T4 is going to allow 2.5 to 3 floors, a little higher intensity, but not much. The T4, which is the red, you're going to get up to 3 to 4 floors. And the second number, the 4, is with a bonus. And then when you get to the T5, which is the cost plus site and just around the Marin Country Mart and the ferry, you're up to 5 to 7 floors. That's where you get your most bang for your buck. But it makes sense because that's the area that has the largest sites where you could actually do that. It's just not feasible to do it where we are in the downtown here. And then this has not been updated with the most current housing element sites, but I think it's probably pretty close. So in purple are the housing element sites, just so you have a general relation in terms of where they fall in all the different zones across the map.
Let's see a question. Our jurisdictional boundary with the square that's on the bottom left, and those rectangles and squares that are there, are those buildable properties?
That's like the forested hillside on the bottom left.
Yes, bottom left.
Bottom left is that hillside right there that's above where all the
Okay.
spotted owl and everything, so unlikely to be developed.
Even though it's isn't that municipal water district?
What, open space might own a lot of it,
Yeah,
and then, I don't know if water district does, I know open space owns a lot of it, and there are some sites like at the fringe that might be developable, like privately owned, but most of it I think is owned by open space.
and do the squares reference sort of previous ownership
Yeah.
of lots or something?
I don't know what.
I just wondered, I
think it
haven't
was-
seen that before.
Yeah, there's strange, it's just a strange,
Strange lot line look.
yeah, they're strange a lot.
Generally, the white is open space, possibly industrial utility land, but I think it's mostly open space.
Okay, so just sidebar on that, because
Yeah.
I've never seen that. They're
Yeah,
just odd,
It's weird because it's gridded off like it's a
like it's a
flat.
flat area.
Yeah. So I'm gonna just walk through each of the zones, and I've got like an aerial of each of it, an example of each zone.
Is that what you handed out to us?
No, it's later, this is for later, yeah.
All right,
So this is the T3. So here we're trying to emulate basically single family scale massing. So as a reminder, this document only applies to multifamily projects. There's a whole question about ADUs, and we deal with how ADUs are cited. Opticos made a separate document on managing ADUs from Marin, which could be something we could adopt separately. Or the ADUs would be handled in this with the massing and all the controls that we provided. This is the typical, this is just looking around Larkspur, sort of the typical type of built form that you see in this area. Even though there is some two unit, multi-unit buildings, a lot of it has all the single family feel. You've got usually one curb cut, even when you've got multiple units. And then so when we like studied basically the way that housing work in Larkspur, we saw this, the way this works in terms of the way the parking works. On hillsides, the parking is actually right up front on the street if the hill goes up. Or if the hill goes down, sometimes there's like a structured parking deck to park on. But if it's level, the parking is either the garage or it goes back. So we looked at the existing built form, and we determined that the max width of these lots is usually about 75 feet. And the maximum building wall is typically about 48 feet. And then with the wings, we have a width and depth. And this is all us studying the built form in Larkspur so that we can design standards that are going to work with Larkspur. So when these things are built, they'll actually fit into the rest of the city. Building heights, this is what everyone always likes. So for this section, you can see here, we just have 2.5 to 3 floors max. The 2.5 is without the bonus. With the density bonus, you get 3 floors. That can be a pretty low intensity building. People always ask what 2.5 floors is. This is 2.5 floors. Where you raise the stoop on one side a little bit, you got a little bit of a slope, and you're going to parking around the back side. This counts as a 2.5 floor building. And I think 2.5 floors, even 3 floors, especially if the roof gables, is probably pretty consistent with single family design. So in the next zone, we have one notch up in terms of density. It's a T4SN attached housing. You can see it's generally clustered in kind of the central north part of Larkspur. And the typical types of buildings we see around Larkspur that are like this for multifamily look like this. They're fairly low slung, 3 floors, 2 or 3 floors. You might see some townhouses. The pedestrian connectivity, because it's in a hilly area, usually is mediocre. There's a lot of parking. There's a lot of parking lots or parking under the building. Sometimes that's visible from the street, which is not desirable. So that's something that we wanted to deal with. And then when we did the same study for these zones, we came up with these standards here at the bottom, which is the 150 max lot width and the maximum building length and the 40-foot max depth. When we get to the example, it'll tie back why we did all of this. So keep it in your mind when we actually walk through the example. I think it's clear how we apply the lot width and building length to try to create future development that's commensurate with the existing conditions in Larkspur. So the next one up is the T4. This one gets you, I think actually that needs to be updated. This gets you 3 to 4 floors. And I believe you can get you can get a little, sorry. Oh, no, it's still T4SN. Sorry, this is still the T4SN. So this is still 2.5 to 3 floors. No, we don't have retail at this point in this area, in these zones. They're not retail zones. All right, this is the next one, T4SNS. This one is 3 to 4 floors. The 4 floors are the bonus. Now this includes downtown and we have outside. So one of the provisions we've put in this zone is that you can't do lot consolidation, because one of the things that makes this so nice is this kind of staccato of ownership. You don't have big parcels that have huge frontages. You have a series of kind of historical older buildings. So we wanted to disallow the ability for some developer to buy up 6 of them, combine them to do a really large project. So, that's something that's up for debate, whether everyone's, okay with that. I can't foresee a lot of development directly on Magnolia in this location. I think the opportunity is the parking lots behind. But then that's gonna also come back to, what parking allowances are agreed upon.
With that provision, you say you cannot combine lots of that pass legal muster.
That's what I was wondering.
I mean,
Like, write it in notes as.
That's the question. I mean, I know that's for the attorney, I think
But they still have to divide the sites into building sites.
they still
even
have
if
to
they-
divide it into building sites. Even if they were to combine it, they have to buy it to do it in building sites, but I mean, those sites have to be 150-foot max width, and then their building can only be 120 feet, within a building. So that still keeps it a pretty reasonable scale, although I'd say that's probably a little larger than what you have down here right now.
Might be possible to prevent mergers.
Yeah, I mean, parking. You would have to buy up more than 2 lots, so I think to make it really work. You would take, or it would be a real task, it could be done. But I don't see it happening anytime soon.
And your red marks are from what street to what street? Just from pretty much here to Ward? Would that,
Yeah, it's from tenant racket, the racket bottom from
Yeah.
Doherty. It's down, it's like another block and a half, I think. Yeah,
Like to Perry's. I
Very,
think.
so that would include our
That's what-
empty parking lot, our empty lot that the city owns. Next to the Aldrich Street stairs.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, it would include that.
yeah.
I mean, I think there's a huge opportunity with the city or with the lots here.
Yeah.
You're just gonna have a tough time, I mean, all the business owners there are gonna really struggle with that parking taken away.
Oh, like the downtown one.
Yeah. So this shows the building form down here. I mean, the parcels do tend to be narrow. The curb cuts are usually 1 car width. The parking lot is all behind. There are some downtown apartments like the one on the top left, but not too many. And then, here we've got, I think this actually, I think I need a different slide for this, but I think what we want to try to promote here is walkability in this zone, which is great. And I think there's a question about how much parking we would need to provide and what the requirements would be to really encourage people to live down here just to do all walking or as much as possible.
I mean, the aura that it exudes is much more urban than what we're accustomed to. If that's where it becomes reality.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we are.
Like, every.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at, you've got one building, I think, that's 3 floors outside of this one.
This one's only 2.
Is it still in counts too? Well, this
Well,
one's
it's
tall
one,
enough to
two.
be probably 4, but yes. But someone by right could come in and do three floors if they've gone as 4, but. The thing is, like, the sites are so small. I don't think you could do 4 because you need an elevator, and for a site that small. So there's like some building code and cost issues. It's not very efficient cost wise to build on this small lot, so. Someone may figure it out, but it's a real puzzle. And then the building heights here, we have 3 to 4 floors, and then for this, we have 2 diagrams. This is one with a residential stoop. And then we have another one if we were to have a retail. We're setting forth a minimum retail ground floor height of 12 feet from floor to the other side of the ceiling. To attract tenants, that's usually about a minimum. That still keeps you down to a pretty reasonable building height. At 4 floors, are about 55 feet total. With parapet, so. We have talked to some cities like to do less height for that ground floor, but I think, to make it as viable as possible for businesses to move in. is a priority.
Is it possible in your diagram to show the parapet sloping back? Because that's one of the things we did with the bank of the village was, at least got it to push back, so you dropped essentially 3.5 feet.
Yeah, I mean, if you do a gable, like that would make,
Or just even the parapet that has its slope, it goes back. It gives you, it lowers the initial wall.
yeah, sure. And then this is the transit village that we're calling it, which is the higher density, 5 to 7 floors, is near the ferry terminal, the cost plus sites, and of course, the Marine Country Mart. And we know that, of course, site fees own the theater, but the office complex and the parcel behind that, I think they're in progress for developing that for residential. And then, the types of buildings that we can see here, I think the top left is the best illustration of, I think a type of building that might hopefully come in. Could be, might be 3 floors, might be 4 floors, but it shows a higher ground floor with 3 floors above it. And it has a pretty good feel in terms of like a.
Yeah, my immediate reaction is that the one on the upper left would probably stand the test of time better than other designs.
I would agree. Yeah, I mean, I think that would fit in pretty
Because
good.
that would be my major worry would be, something might look, fairly seductive right now, but would it be so seductive in 20 years?
Well, you might look on that. I'll tell you, I think architects have always been trying to figure out how do you make something timeless,
Build
And-
pyramid.
Yeah, I mean, like modern architecture was in and then it went out and now it's back in.
Definitely that,
Yeah.
oh, yeah.
It's very much in vogue now. And then here, same thing, we have a residential that has stoops, and then we have one for the commercial ground floor with that 12-foot minimum floor to ceiling. So I want to just kind of walk through what we would do with one of these. So this is 560 Magnolia. I'm taking the full site as opposed to obviously the parcel's got a tongue, and I'm just taking the full site because I think it's more instructive for this discussion. Obviously, every owner is going to have to go through a process similar to this. So this is in the T4 SMS site. We know that. And then the next step is you look to the odds, and what you'll see, you'll actually be able to find your site in the odds here, and it's going to tell you where the primary frontage is by color based on the key. And then this site happens to be 440 feet by 350 feet. And I think this is a great site as an example, because if someone came in and built one giant housing complex, it would look out of scale, because you're coming right out of the downtown where you have the finer grain. So we've written the odds to help break that down some. So this is kind of how we did it. The first thing we said is, we talked about that design site, because it's more than 150 feet wide and it's more than 250 feet long. What you have to do is you have to break it up into different design sites. So you have to put essentially, an assumed road through here or pedestrian path that separates the buildings out, and same in this direction. And that gives you the frontages, and that gives you 4 design sites to work with. And, this is a site that's larger than half an acre. And it has a primary frontage greater than 150 feet, so they're required to essentially, build on 150 foot or smaller modules within that larger site.
Isn't that right now, 3 different building sites owned by 3 different?
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Well, then the city next week, yeah.
yeah, I took the big site just as an example.
Okay.
Can I ask a couple questions just
Yeah.
for application? So if someone has more, let's say, I was thinking the Magnolia one, if you could fit 2, or on this one, if you. The design sites have a certain size requirement, don't they?
Right, so the design site maximum width is 150. So they would have to work within that.
So if you have that and you have excess land, what happens? Like if you can fit 2 and then you have that land left over.
Well, I think they would have to look, they've got open space requirements they have to meet, they might have to do surface parking in back, like, I think it depends on the configuration of the lot. It's a good question, I need to look at a weird lot and see. Like, that's a weird lot test, right? Just
Which is what if like someone, yeah.
because
has-
Magnolia, the Magnolia site was kind of.
Oh, yeah.
One has hillside.
Yeah, that hillside,
Makes it complicated.
And then,
it's a good question.
and then, with that first, the top left there with the building that covers the whole lot, that's allowed under the standards for that district.
Yeah, so what this is showing is it's showing a ground floor footprint with a grocer or something like that, and then the dotted line is above the first floor with the residential. So in this particular, in this zone on Doherty, there's residential or there's retail allowed on the ground floor. So, I mean, I guess your question is, do we restrict how much?
There's no,
retail?
or that's, so like San Anselmo actually kept their floor area ratios, even though they adopted the standards.
I was gonna ask about.
Yeah, but there are, so that's, I mean, it's still something you could do. It's not normal for form-based codes to have those kind of restrictions. But then that's why it was my kind of, when I looked at this, I was wondering that, so any one of those sites could just cover the entire site, is that how it works?
Like a retail only, or?
Retail, or if it was housing too, like anything, like is there any limit? Is there any limit to the building form that restricts how much of the lot it could cover?
Well, so there's a limit to the residential building form in terms of the width and the length.
Okay,
The commercial, because this applies to multifamily residential, the retail is underneath. So I would say that the retail, in terms of the retail area, that's probably governed by the floor area ratio.
so we need to we need to keep
Yeah.
it or need to keep the underlying standard for
Right.
commercial.
Yeah, because residential is never a floor area ratio. That's
And so
always-
that's why that residential above and the other buildings are are
Right.
smaller.
Right, because a residential naturally, just by the layout of units, has about a 65 foot width per bar. Otherwise, it gets too deep and you can't get enough light into the depth of the unit. But the retail, if we were to put a grocery back on that site and it was on the ground floor, that would have to be governed back by the FAR.
And then the other piece that we have to work in the ordinance is parking, because this only talks about parking for residential, so we could still apply parking for the commercial site. If we wanted to.
I think you would still, I think you would use the commercial guidelines.
Okay, right, that's the table that got
Yeah.
taken out that it was just wrong that I had it, so I wanted it to
Well-
be taken out, but we do need a table like that, but I can help.
No, you're right.
Craft it.
I think one of the frustrating things with the odds is they try to control a lot of the commercial use, but the commercial isn't what they're controlling. So we kind of try to take the commercial out to let it fall back more to the city code. But like with a mixed use building like this, there's a question about, how the city, I guess, reviews and approves the project. They're gonna review the residential part and form based on the odds, but the commercial part will be governed by.
Well, yeah, that's my understanding, at least with the county handbook, was the building standards, you'd have the commercial within those building standards, so you have the, like the high-rise building, or that makes more sense, there's commercial, and it still has to meet all the same.
Right.
So it doesn't matter what use is on the ground floor, if it's residential or commercial, still have to meet the same
That's
standards.
a great question. Because I mean, the standards are designed for residential, so I mean, if you applied them to commercial,
It would
they
work,
wouldn't work for a grocer. They would work for a lot of stores and restaurants, they would work for everything kind of downtown, there's restaurants and things like that. But a grocery usually wants 45,000 square feet unless it's a Trader Joe's, which is 15. So that's kind of the,
it's tricky if we want a
That's
grocery
tricky.
store.
But the parking, like,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the Whole Foods in Nevada, where all parking is underneath the building.
Right, yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
residential above. So there's two split levels of parking, split level of grocery, residential above. There's no parking out on open ground,
Street level.
on street level.
So that could be like parking in
Yeah.
there.
That's what I see there. Is that kind of use of the parking that's internal to the building.
Right,
Have you
Percent.
yeah,
yeah, I know that, I just wondering, if from a developer's standpoint. Trying to implement something like that, a lot like the Lucky Lot would be tremendously expensive.
yeah. Can I
Don't you
ask you
have-
that
do you agree with that?
the two lower buildings on the bottom of your image here as an example, those are residential 3 or 4 story
Those are townhouses.
townhouses?
And they can go up to 4 floors and
Okay.
stuff. Yeah.
Because the Rose Lane condos, which are right behind there, are 3 levels, I believe.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the issue with like a grocery too is a grocer's probably gonna want 300 parking spaces, so. If you structure it, I mean, structure parking space, right, now that will cost you about $30,000 a space, so if you're looking at 400 spaces, that's 10-20 million bucks. Parking is parking drives all of development, right, so, I mean, I think that would be a real challenge, I mean, your best bet in that, if you want a grocer, would be someone like a Trader Joe's that have a smaller footprint and can get by. Trader Joe's can do very little parking. Like in downtown Berkeley.
Yes, people accept the walls instead.
Well, it turns over fast too.
It does turn over fast. People park on the street, to some extent, which may be frustration of neighbors, but. When you have a Safeway, Albertson, something like that, and they can with a 45, they usually want 400 spaces. It's challenging.
Okay.
So once they've done the design sites, they would go and they would look at the building heights, and in this case, it's 3 floors at the base scheme and 4 floors with the bonus. So that would allow them to figure that out, and then they would go through and deal with setbacks. Basically, it's just step by step. You look at the setbacks, which are at the top left here. The top left is setback here. And then what you'll notice is a shaded region. That's a region where we would allow accessory buildings. So if you have like an ADU, it would be off the street, it would be off the primary frontage street, not necessarily the secondary frontage street. We have a section here on encroachments that would count for like if you have a bay window, like we do in the picture on the right. And I think you guys probably have stuff in the code for that too already. That we're codifying that for multifamily residential. And then we've got the parking requirements. So you figure out how many you need to park for your use. And then talk about like where the massing is, where the parking goes in terms of the massing going on the street. And then this gets back to the question of, well, why can't they build out the whole site? Well, the width and depth is, limited to 65-foot maximum depth. Separation between lanes is 28 feet. The maximum width is 120 feet in this zone. So that starts to scale the buildings more in scale with what's in the district. Obviously, if you get to the T5 Transit Village, it allows for larger scale buildings. But in this district, which is primarily the downtown and a more sensitive area, we try to scale it down to be more respectful. And then we move on to shared open space. Open space is specific to units and things like that. And then what you end up with is a site plan, essentially a site plan that has a set of buildings. So here that lot has been subdivided. The 10% common area requirement has become a private road that goes between there, as well as area between these buildings. You've got a residential building here, you've got a vertical mixed use building here, and then you've got a series of townhouses here which park themselves. And I think this is, and I certainly appreciate your opinion, but this feels like it's probably pretty in line from a scale standpoint with coming out of Magnolia going in that direction,
I just agree that we're so back in this kind of configuration, the tail wagging the dog, meaning the parking.
That's always the case, right?
Yeah, I don't see it.
Oh, it's underneath right there.
So, I mean, I think it's our understanding that, someone can basically get an exemptions for parking for the residential.
So the parking's underneath, the retail's on the second floor, so.
Retail would be on the ground floor. They'd probably pop the parking would probably be on the back, and it would be on the second floor. But they could seek an exemption from the parking for the residential. And, for residential for sale product, they probably won't, because they're gonna need that space to sell the unit. For a rental product, they might forgo having the parking.
Yeah, it just, it's like Magnolia Village, they have no guest parking essentially. So the neighborhood's gonna absorb that. And the same story here.
Yeah, we've seen it at the planning commission also, where you would have the neighbors object to any kind of a variance of the parking requirement when there's a development going on next door. We've had that several times at the planning commission.
I'll tell you, we did a study looking at the existing parking. Requirements in Larkspur, and if you take just a typical site, it's like an acre. And you put in a building, like half of it's a building that's residential and half of it is surface parking. You just do surface parking, you get like 1.5 floors of residential, and so until you're out of parking space on the surface. So for any type of density, either the parking requirement has to come down, or you have to structure, build structure. So,
Well, until we get rid of our cars. Just-
Yeah, I mean, which ultimately is.
Good plan.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And then once you figured out the building height, you can come down and you can select, basically, it's not an architectural design, but it's a typology, it's a type of frontage, whether that's a residential porch, a dooryard, a stoop, or forecourt. These are pretty typical typologies for fronts, and this responds to giving the buildings in Larkspur a traditional face onto the public way. A face that I think that everyone will recognize as part of Larkspur, with the porches and the stoops. So that, regardless of what happens off the street, this should help regularize the look. And then you come to the materials, and we've provided a variety of materials, and we've given rules for how the materials are used. For instance, materials, you can't change materials in the outside corner, just as an inside corner, because in the traditional building, you use brick and ended at the outside corner, it would turn the corner, right? So if you see it done poorly, it doesn't turn the corner.
No,
It looks bad. It looks bad. So we're not allowing that. I think the trick with materials, though, is that we can't shoot all really nice materials, because we can't disallow affordable housing to get built. And affordable housing is this constant balance of trying to get materials that are durable and look good, but are not super expensive. So that might be hardy plank siding. You're not going to see the trespa. You might see vinyl windows on those, and you're not going to see wood windows. Some communities don't like the vinyl windows. Vinyl windows okay, but if you're doing affordable housing, that's a huge cost impact. So that's one of those things where we're trying to strike a middle ground to allow materials that aren't premium materials, but I think will look good. And there's great examples of these materials being used. Honestly, well, an architect, like, if you hire a bad architect, you can give them all the rules in the world, and they would just do that. I wish I could say you could like future proof that and completely, you just can't,
Yeah, I guess when it comes to the choice of materials, I think the one criteria that I would look for would be durability. Because you say, okay, well, we use cheaper materials, it will be more affordable, but in the long run, it's really more affordable if you have to rebuild it in 10 years instead of 30.
Durability is really important.
So hardy board, if you give that example, hardy board is actually pretty durable.
It's durable, it's good for fire resistant,
Very good.
and
for fire
it's pretty
resistance.
good. I mean,
And the maintenance is
It's
lower.
actually pretty good stuff.
Yeah,
it's pretty good stuff. It's not the traditional, but it's pretty good stuff.
Until you start putting grain patterns. It's bad to me.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the grain pattern. That. And what I'm trying,
Get into the future now.
Yeah.
Non-architect over here.
so what I'm trying to avoid is vinyl siding, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
because that's dumb. Yeah, you can power wash it, so you have to clean up pretty nice, but
that's my daughter has in Connecticut. She's been fine. I don't find it.
it's okay. So I used to live in Rhode Island, and in
No,
that climate, the vinyl's great, because it can stand the cold and it doesn't split and with the freeze thaw cycle, but hoping for a little bit better out there. So now I wanted to go through the sites, and we want to look at some buildings that exist. And these were handpicked by Elise, some of her favorite buildings around Larkspur, starting with this one. This one is in the downtown region. It's a bar building that probably built, I think, in the 60s, maybe.
There's kind of there somewhere.
Is that,
The-
is that the diocese that they don't have?
No,
Oh, it's adjacent to their.
yeah, that's right.
Their
It's
playground.
playground, yeah.
So there are aspects of this building that are compliant to the odds as written. It's, lot size is reasonably small. The building height is within the allotted building height. It has all the setbacks that the encroachments and the mass length is in compliance, but where it's not compliant. You know, the face on the street, the primary facade has no glazing. You've got parking that is visible from the street on the ground floor. It doesn't have the rear setback that's required. It doesn't have the shared open space. The street face only has one material. It has no high quality materials whatsoever. So, you know, this is an example where they'd have to go back to the drawing board and they'd have to actually give it a public face on the public board. Which I don't think is a bad thing. So our odds require that on the ground floor, if you have parking, you have to have a 30-foot building area at the ground floor on the street. Whether that ends up being retail or a leasing office or whatever, you just can't have essentially a building or still with parking down the street because it's an unfortunate condition.
So let me understand, you're saying they'd have to change this if we adopt these standards?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, no,
Someone was coming in with that design
Okay,
today,
oh, okay. That's what I figured.
If it's existing,
It's
it's
existing.
there forever,
Okay,
but the mass and the height are fine.
right?
I understand, but this would not be acceptable now.
If they came in with this today,
We would ask to make the changes.
you would have to have them changes.
Got it.
This is one of our favorite projects, 285 Magnolia. We're real fans of this in our office and I've used this in
Weren't you
often.
on court planning when this was approved?
Yep.
Yeah,
We show this example of clients around the country because it's such a cool example. The only things that aren't compliant is that the retail space on the ground floor is a little too low. It's only 10 feet. We want that 12. We want a little more glazing at the ground floor to provide that ground floor transparency. The accessory buildings in back are larger than the accessory buildings that we would allow. I mean, maybe that's something up for discussion tonight, you know, whether those, because that's what ADUs would be. How large do you want them to allow them to be?
Is it because they're not separate buildings?
and they're attached.
Yeah,
Yeah.
is it just part of the building length broken up?
Yeah, so these are attached.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I think, or are they 4 buildings? They might be.
No, there were
buildings.
4
They're 4 buildings. So you're not allowed 4 buildings, is that why? So it forces them
Well-
to be accessory?
you can do the 4, but the ones in the back are accessory, so they have to be smaller. So, because we're
What
trying,
makes them accessory?
because
there's units.
they're set back off the streets, they're separate buildings. This is a very unusual development, like with the accessory building, we're basically trying to legislate ADUs from being larger than the main house.
I thought they were contiguous.
I would think they're
with
like
each other.
primary buildings, yeah.
That's
We should
interesting.
walk down there too, you know, there's a wine shop in there,
Right.
so we could do like a little field trip.
Yeah.
Well, here's an interesting thing. This is what they turned in originally. So we looked at this one. And this one has a large garage, the parking structure underneath, and this one is largely compliant. You know, the only things that really weren't compliant, were the retail height and the glazing and the distance between the accessory buildings, but this one. Because the accessory buildings in back are smaller, this one was pretty much compliant. So,
Well, that all came about.
Yeah,
I remember
what
we
happened
agreed
was-
to-
yeah.
Yeah,
It's been a while.
it's been a while.
this is more aggressive. I don't even know how they would make that pencil, honestly, but. What's there today is a great development. So I think one question to all of you is, you know, how much allowance do you want to give to the size of an accessory dwelling unit? Or, you know, it's a unit that is set back from the street behind a primary structure.
There's only a maximum size for the primary structure. There's not a minimum, right? So they could just build 4, nothing that says you can only do 2 primary structures.
Well,
It just wouldn't comply maybe with the rear setback.
yeah, you would have a rear setback, but you can build an accessory building in that zone. But the accessory building has to be smaller,
No, I don't.
Yeah.
know.
for separate
I think
units.
there's.
Yeah, it's
They're
for
just both-
sale, for
it's
sale
They're
units.
just smaller units is all. I mean,
I was-
that's how I would say it.
maybe there's a confusion of, I mean, my brain definition of ADU is an existing residential area, and then in the backyard or the back area, you put in 900 or 1,000
Yeah,
square foot.
Yeah.
As an ADU, maybe accessible from a different angle, or a different walkway system or something, and that can be an additional residential unit back there for rent. These, I think, are, well, in my understanding of that particular space, it's a one contiguous,
Just small apartment.
just small apartments. but-
This almost goes under like the typology of like a village.
Yeah, kind of. But you're asking us what do we feel comfortable with in this kind of design with these type of setbacks for what size ADU, let's say, would be
Right.
compatible there?
Would you be okay allowing basically an equivalent size building in the rear setback as what's on the screen?
Well, we have a lot of those. You gave an example just right here of the brown shingled ones that do the same structure.
But isn't the elephant in the room, the fact that if you get a project like this, it comes before the planning commission. And the planning commission looks at the merits of the projects as a whole. And makes a discretionary decision to either approve the project or not. Where what we're talking about is, no, we're going to have rules which will lead to a pre-approval of a certain project, so we sort of have to speculate about what a project might look like. For this case, when the planning commission has discretion over approval or not approval, you know, we can look at it and say, hey, this works or it does not.
Well, so if you
So
were,
that's kind of the conundrum.
And
It is.
that went through the plan.
so,
This when that was the planning commission, we like the project.
so if someone went SB 35 on this and they submitted it. And they were being compliant, and then with 2-year buildings, or were downsized, so they'd be compliant. They would get that approval if they said, well, we really want the larger houses, they could go out of that route and they could go through discretionary review. And get them approved like this.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of the balance, it doesn't prohibit them from doing this.
But. So they would have just, I mean, I think make it pencil, the first project was compliant, and that's the one the planning commission didn't like, not the one that would get built.
I think it was more that the Heritage Board didn't like.
Well, I think they thought it was too small, too many units, the parking was too much. That's why the plate heights are 9 feet in the front, because they wanted everything to be more in scale with what was around it,
Right.
got pushed down a lot.
And preservation of the building across from goes. You know, the old.
Oh, the
house.
old Victorian, yeah, or,
Victorian, so.
Right
you
here.
didn't want that overwhelmed. By something.
So that begs the question, where do we fit in heritage design review? Does that, this is my first meeting, so. Because I remember that building coming to the appeal coming to city council because Heritage. Wanted them to use materials to the front and design ideas that fit with the heritage rules.
we've been thinking through this with the city attorney, and we have to apply objective standards to certain projects. But projects that are within the historic district, as long as we don't put them in a status where they don't need discretionary review, like on the housing element list, we could always retain CEQA control, and that can, or through CEQA, we review whether or not the structure has a significant impact on the environment and the historical
Right.
setting as part of that environment. So long as there's a discretionary review, we always have CEQA and then the second thing that I would be considering is some sort of objective standard that says that and it would be a hard objective standard, but that requires a structure within the district to actually like have a report that says that it complies with the Secretary of Interior standards for historic
Okay,
structures.
so I think that's what ended up happening there.
We have to have like two, the CEQA is one,
Yeah.
and then maybe some objective standard, just in case something doesn't go through CEQA that requires it to meet the guidelines, but I don't know that we'll be able to have, so I don't know how the historic review fits in, it would. Right now, it would still need to go through historic review if it was, we haven't necessarily taken away any discretion yet.
Okay,
It's when we start doing the housing element, we might be taking discretion away from.
And that whole piece, that was one piece of property. So what
Right.
that got tied into.
It was a only
house.
vacant lot that we
Yeah.
had in
In
in a long
ages, yeah.
time, yeah.
It was, yeah.
Just throws a little conundrum
Yeah.
there because.
The other question is, are you mandating that people have a 12-foot or whatever it is, retail space?
We're not mandating, but if you do have retail, it needs to be 12 feet high. You can also take a roof, just have a ground floor, residential, and let you got to 12 feet high.
It could be conversionable.
You could be convertible, like the Magnolia project with South Bill has been a great example for us because we call it like a shop house model where the owner essentially has the retail space that they could use themselves or they could lease out or something, it's like it's convertible for how they want to use it. But in terms of like the way it looks and the frontage looks, it could look like a residential building or a commercial building, but it looks like a commercial building and it's 12 foot high.
And 10 feet for residential,
Right.
So,
and those are 9 feet.
right.
It is really
Yeah.
low, yeah.
And our other ones downtown here are probably taller.
A little bit, but
Yeah.
they're not 12 feet.
No, yeah,
Yeah, I would say historically, those types of retail spaces in all downtowns are, tend to be.
10 feet is sort of standard.
So then there's the option of excluding the historic downtown from the zone so that this doesn't apply there. And then, you have to weigh whether it's better, well, and it may make sense to do that because we haven't studied how these structures would impact the downtown if
Yeah.
they were coming in by right. So as long as we have some discretion, there's some protection, and if there's not, we haven't really studied what that impact would be.
I don't see a lot of parcels available to do much anymore.
No,
Well,
unless you
yeah.
tear something.
Unless you
down.
tear something down.
There's like one a couple
disaster.
doors down from us, but this,
The
Yes.
dentist, the Hanson
right,
dentist.
but at this point right now,
That's
it would be,
not
it would be a similar project to the Magnolia project, where it would go through discretionary review, but you could only apply objective standards. So if you had our current standards, there's not many standards, so this might be better than having no
Yeah.
standards.
Well, keep going. We've got to- Daniel's gotta go soon.
And then we looked at this project in Santa Fe on 4th Street because I think it's very similar to what you might hope it would happen here in the downtown in terms of scale and appearance. So it is compliant in terms of the size and the height, and the interior setbacks, encroachments. Not compliant, it doesn't quite have enough glazing on the ground floor. The rear setback is less than 20 feet. There's a parking entrance on the primary frontage, we prefer that, we want that around the corner. There's no shared open space, and the private open space is pretty small, but those are pretty minor, issues that I think we easily solve.
Sure, it's like Blue Rock.
Yeah.
Is there a plaza in front of the building?
Sidewalk.
This is,
Wow, at least.
Wow.
She's sleeping.
Oh, you should brought her in. It's.
Yes, yeah.
We all said the same thing.
That was a good.
Well, so that was the end of my walking through the odds. Andy's got a slide to talk about the next bit of process. But, I think it's a good chance for anyone to ask other questions about the format of the odd or concerns about like the things we've been discussing,
So-
the situation.
Being on the planning commission. How much design control do we actually have? So. With the Magnolia project, which still is bubbling around in my brain, we asked them to slope the parapet and they agreed to do that. But I don't know whether we could have mandated that they do that under the new rules.
Or the rules would have to say you have to have a slope parapet.
Or you could have a slope or a,
Or, well, but then they would, if they chose whatever one, if it
right,
has to be an objective standard, so.
But can I ask you a broader question? I mean, I listened to all this and I'm wondering, with that case study, if you invoke SB 35 or 82345, they can do whatever they want, right? I mean, what is this going to
they,
be?
well, they have to follow the
They
laws.
they have to follow the objective standards, but if the objective standards don't allow the density that's allowed,
Oh,
like for
okay,
the Magnolia project, they had, I think there was like 30 units that could have been built there.
Yeah.
If they couldn't get those 30 units in the house types that are allowed in that district, they can build whatever they need to build to get those. So we have to really make sure that the density that we're allowing in these districts aligns with the size of the buildings. that are allowed.
so in principle to, over specify, if you were to say in T4 suburban core, T4 core, which is where this is, so the T4 core section, there can be no parapets on the roof. And then and that did not affect their density. And that will bring the height down 8 or 10 feet, so that could have been done if we were on clocks. I mean,
That could be, I think the issue is you have to kind of, if you can give them options, but then you can't control what option they pick, so you could say, well, there can't be parapets. But then if there's not parapets, there's mechanical equipment on the roof, then there's going to be a screen, then it might be set back. But you see that more, which you want to see that less, but.
and I guess so Masonic is across the street and that's here and it may go up. It might come for review to Brock and I guess I think the real contentious thing, there were lots of things about parking and, our right of way and the bike lanes, but ultimately was the 54 feet, which was the. And I'm just wondering if Masonic comes under this, how that would play out differently. Because, if we do have, a restriction of 3 floors, so they could do the same thing all over. There's nothing to stop them, and they can put the parapets, and they have a better view on Corte Creek.
We have a limit on the height of the parapets, but. If they do the bonus and they get up to 3 floors, or I guess in this district, they can get 3 floors by right. Then I don't see the way they can do that.
And they can do the 10-foot ceilings, because Brock negotiated down 9 feet, or I think you got it a little bit lower to bring the overall,
just to bring it down a little bit.
yeah.
So we have a building, that there's a number of floors, but there's also building height max. But that building height max does basically say 10-foot residential. I mean, we could lower that to 9 foot, if it starts getting tight, especially with the frame construction. When you do concrete high rise, you do a 10-inch concrete precast slab, and then you just do a skin coat, and you put the lights in, and that's tight, but with wood frame, you got a lot more structure there, so.
Well, one takeaway is we could do this and we wouldn't clash with the state laws, like SB 35. I mean, because if you have a 10-foot or 9-foot ceiling, it doesn't affect density, and we don't see their pro forma, but they can't argue that this is affecting their ability to build affordable house.
No, although I know that some developers make the argument when it comes to market rate housing, that floor to ceiling does impact. And I think Magnolia made that
Yeah,
argument.
I think it would. I think that today's design wants to have that kind of elevation.
I mean, I don't know how a developer would deal with that. I don't know if they would sue the city because they could bid that. extra
Because the only critique I have, I mean, I like, I focused on T4 core, T4 suburban main, and T5 transit, I mean,
Yes.
there's only one more.
Yeah.
But, when we started this, and by the way, Catherine, I'm so glad you're here. I love working with Catherine, but, one of my, this gets so technical and, people like Brock can understand a lot, but for me, the, city council reporting out responsibility was, are we promoting affordability? Because that's important. That's in our general plan. And are we preventing, Houston like zoning? We have a house like back there at night. Well, I mean, I call it Frankenstein. And then the last and not least is, can we pay special attention to the downtown? And I'm seeing, the gas station, Lucky's, and I mean, in the racquetball courts. I mean, we really could radically transfer downtown. So I would almost, I don't want to, throw a curveball, but, that for suburban Maine, which is covering that area, might have T6 suburban Maine downtown, and that would be a little heavier, and that would also send the signal that we're not trying to stop development. We just feel that the character of the town and the biggest protests are gonna come from, putting something ugly next to the Lark Theater.
Yeah.
Or, and I, that's been my thing, like, when they did North Magnolia, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of a little out there, but if you get to the heart of the, Larkspur identity architecturally, historic is not gonna stop anything. And, we don't, and we're trying to pass on policy that, 8 or 10 years from now, who knows what the motives are and what the economics are, and so I just, that's my main input for tonight, is like, can we go back to the big picture and look at downtown as I'm gonna hypothetically say T6. And do something that's gonna be a little bit more like, hey, downtown is really special. And if you do something, and I also want to applaud, Elise and everybody. I mean, if I understand this summary sheet, by the way, was really helpful guidance, that's what I'm.
Like magnifying glass.
Yeah. But that it looks like 2/3 of our stuff is proposed and possibly gonna happen in T5 Transit Village. So that was for me, that idea that we can build and we don't have to run into the fact that infill is like, like drilling teeth. I mean, you can do it in a place, you can go 5-7 there, it's by the smart station and there's some logic and all that. I really appreciate that most of the way, if someone says, how do you build 979 units? 600 approximately will be built where, it's by 101. Do you really care? That's even further than Wind Cup.
That's an easy 600 too. I mean,
Yeah.
you could go more than that, under those guidelines. And I think, the argument's always gonna be, you can show that to HCD, and I think it's an easy sell for them because it's by all the transit. You don't have to have all the parking to support it, like that's an easy sell.
So can we put in a T6? I don't know how Catherine and Brock feel about it, but I mean, I do think that
You're saying a new zone.
a new zone that's specific to, this core identity, I mean, the heart of downtown, they have it on San Anselmo Street, they have it, in Grant Street in Nevada, each of our 11 cities has a special area, which I really want to see, undergoing severe, makeover.
But I thought the example you showed of what is the potential for the 3 lots for Lucky's used to be. I mean, I could hear your point, Gabe, that we don't want to have some huge monolith structure. But I think we also have the reality that we do have some lots that are pretty substantial in size and potentially can have a confluence of mixed use. That I think this example being shown with 4 detached sort of separate buildings, separate entities, outdoor space, separate road area. We could break up, I mean, I'm not the architect, but it could break up that feeling of a monolith too. And provide successfully, at least in the example you gave, a mixed use development with retail and residential that isn't a chunky block like the 4th Street one, you said.
This is basically how we're trying to solve that problem.
Yeah.
Basically,
To still get us some stuff.
you get a good number of units, but you have to break it down in mass. So it works driving out of downtown. It feels like it's part of that.
Where is the Nazari property?
It's right there.
I know where it is.
It's right, yes, right. It's a whole bunch.
Yeah, but what is its designation?
Yeah, what is that one? T four
It's
probably.
T4. And I brought Alex here because I live across the street from there, so I have a financial conflict of interest with that whole area. And so Alex is here to answer any questions or talk to you about that.
Yeah, that's T4.
Okay, yeah, and so it's the same standard that would be for Drake's Landing and stuff on Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. I mean, those are all T4 SMS. So I'm just wondering also, this is a question that Catherine reposed
Yeah.
further back, because this was getting not only, fairly technical about massing and cadence and materials and all that, but it was also like, what bar, it's back to Brock's question, do we have any control? Like, we can hope that it'll look like this, but what workarounds in the odds could make something that would be, I don't think North Magnolia is terrible, but it clearly, the neighbors hated it, and I think they could have done better. Can we build an odds that is a filter out for stuff like that and still gives them enough design freedom? I mean, I don't know, we had this discussion 6 months ago and before, but now the rubber hits the road because we went through, an approval and an appeal and all the emotion. And it gave us a sense, people were paying attention, nobody's, maybe one public comment tonight, that, nobody really appreciates what could happen to downtown, and I'm trying to, again, think ahead for the next, 4 to 8 years.
But just in the extent that I'm new to this process, it seems like you've built in with your porch, your frontage. Requirements that are those 6 different ones you listed, that soften the exterior, that allow more open visuals, that allow more common space. It seems like that, just from the perspective of that development we talked about, Magnolia Village, I didn't feel like that was baked into their design, that these design standards seems to bake in a lot more of that reduction in massive form.
Yeah, I don't think I saw the final one of that, but I know that the early one had, the ground floor didn't have any stoop, it was grade and level, and it was set back off the street more. I guess the question, what I would ask is, what about that project? Did you really not like? Because I think some aspects of the design, you would be legislating architecture, but if it's the mass issue, that's something we ought to legislate. So what are the aspects, I guess, that the community didn't like about
I
it?
think it was height and mass.
Yeah.
I think those two, and again, I would qualify that by saying, we probably had, a few hundred people, and they even formed a committee and did 4 appeals, and most of them from 10 feet, and they kept telling us, fight for us, and if you voted for me. You're like bombing or telling us to be courageous and roll up our sleeves. I'm like looking up at my database. You don't even live in the district.
Now we're being recorded, Mr. Supervisor.
Well, that is the truth.
In truth, it's not, it's not that bad of a building.
Yeah.
It's not a-
actually fairly well done, and there were just things that they could have done, that would have been nice for the community that they didn't. And
And my recollection is they had a higher floor to floor. Didn't they?
Yes,
Didn't they
they
go
did.
11? And
Yeah.
then they had the fourth floor that was.
So it was 10.
That was the
10 feet
parapet.
clear.
10 feet, so.
And then we got them to drop.
I mean, the mezzanines up there,
So I mean, that's one of those things where it comes back to the discussion we've had, like what's the limit you want to put? Because it will affect for-profit
Yeah.
development.
Right,
Well, and that's why
that's the balance.
I'm trying to say, like, if let's stick with that use case, North Magnolia, if you were to say, however you design the odds, you're not gonna allow the mezzanine up there. So it'll have the 3 stories, and maybe it's 9 instead of 10 feet. But you're doing this for, what's the total number here? We have Central Larkspur as, the big one would be the racket court, the racket club, that's 180, but 24, 25, and 50, and I can't read it because it's too small, but under 100 units of our total. So, we're really saying that we're not trying to put up roadblocks for development, but in the downtown area specifically, we just might have a few more restrictions because it has that special character. And again, Catherine and Brock, you may disagree with me, but that's my thought is that.
And I don't know how you do that.
Yeah,
That's the point, yeah.
In principle, yeah, I would agree, but I just don't know.
Yeah.
Right now it's 3 to 4 floors, like that's.
Yeah.
You can't
I just think
define
making it 3 floors, not 4. I think 4 floors,
tend
don't
to-
you think that's a lot for downtown?
Well, we have 4 floors right there at Rose Lane, right behind, at the example being given. I mean, the 2.5 example doesn't look. I think it's 4.
Maybe I
But
didn't know that.
do you have in mind specifically Magnolia Avenue in the downtown area?
I'm sorry?
Maybe that's your T6. I mean, are you specifically thinking about this street right here?
Yeah, kind of like
So
word.
maybe that's your T6, just.
That's right. Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
very limited. It's only a handful, under 100, out of the arena 979. And it would not really be saying, Larkspur is trying to make it hard for developers, because we would love it if you're in Larkspur Landing, we'd love it if you're in, T4 SMS, but we have a T6, just because this area, we really want to, make sure it's architecturally, there's a little more control.
Well, could you not
Or any control.
Yeah.
So at least mention maybe that we could exclude the historic downtown from the odds, and it would fall under different requirements, is that correct?
Or you could just, so one of the goals is just to get something approved so we could get grant funding back.
Yeah.
And it's.
Yeah.
So you could exclude areas or or just recommend approval of certain areas that you're more comfortable with, just to move it forward. And then come back to other areas, or move forward with this, so you have some standard in place and then come back and refine it. There are options like that.
I think that's what we have to do, because when you see the timeline is, we have a desperate timeline of September 30th approvals, so. I mean,
Could you not specify simply, certain streets? For three levels,
Well, it does seem like
like
the,
Magnolia Avenue between. William and Ward, or even maybe a little further, is not exceeding three.
I mean, is that the historic core?
Or is T4 suburban Main Street really the area we're talking
Be around the street.
Oh,
Right.
okay, well,
That's the part where people
Yeah.
are walking around here think of, that's downtown Larkspur. It's these three,
I've been
three
thinking
blocks.
about doing that.
Can you
though.
zoom
I
in and
don't
then
think we need
maybe
to
share
tie our
screen?
hands too much. That way,
It's all, that's all
I mean, I
T4.
think
Yeah.
approvals, we can add a layer of, we can add an additional layer,
Okay.
with some amendments later, if that's possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think,
because I don't think we're really looking at that many parcels, because the parcels as we went around are narrow.
Yep.
There's small parcels as they are, it's good that there's parking constraints already. It's unless you look at maybe the shopping center area and maybe the racket club, those are really essentially the only two, unless the church takes over their whole parking lot. Most of our parcels in this corridor are very narrow and small and difficult to build more than.
that's absolutely true, because an elevator basically.
Right.
Well,
We're gonna have to do that in this building.
This is an interesting segue, because right now we started a study of three sites, and one of them is the racket club. Well, we're going to design out based on how many units we can get, and we're working with Kaiser Morrison Associates, so they can tell us what's financially feasible from the developer side. So we're gonna see what actually pencils out on that lot.
For the racket club?
Yep, using these odds. The housing element shows it for 180 units, I think.
Yeah.
So, I think we can fit that, we'll see how much parking we can fit, and we'll see if that has to be structured. We'll see what type of construction and what that all boils down to, like what's possible. They may come back and say, look, a 3-floor building, it's not enough density to make a pencil out on the development side.
Yeah, and I'm afraid that is, so Catherine, your point's well taken. I mean, it's real, those are the heavyweights,
ones.
those two. That's, I mean, that's it. And, now if you are just wanting, kind of the bookends of City Hall and Lark to be kept architecturally and aesthetically and historically beautiful, and now you're gonna affect Mazzari and the gas station, that's another one that they want to build a lot of property on, and the racquetball, then you've really defeated the purpose of, trying to promote, responsible housing.
Yeah, I get your point that I went through, are you familiar with Truckee, California?
Yeah. I was
So
there.
I went through there a couple of months ago. And they really have transformed that. I mean, it's unrecognizable from what it was 10 years ago, where you've got 3 and 4 story structures very, very adjacent to the downtown. And it's hard for me to say, well, is that a good thing or a bad thing? But it definitely does change it makes Truckee look a lot more urban than it once was. And maybe that's, maybe socially that's a good thing. I'm not opining on that, but I guess you're right.
And
There's a danger of changing the.
Yeah, and as a committee, I'm not wanting to overdo my point, but I just want to see what you guys think on that one, because that, after 12 months, besides a lot of really interesting detail, those were my big
Yeah.
takeaways,
I think to your point, and then we had the case study of the building over here, which did go through some transition changes and everything. Basically, because heritage and the heritage rules played into what their exterior look could be, what type of materials they could have. So we still have the control, or at least the ability to help guide sort of the look and feel of a structure too, because it is within the structure, within the heritage rules. So, I mean, I hear your point. I don't want to, blow up anything either, but I don't want to tie our hands for opportunities.
And also it's late in the game, so I'm assuming the study on the racquetball, it's not gonna happen before September 30th.
We're doing everything we can.
I think we're gonna have it
Yeah,
by then. We are,
and how would that affect us? I mean, we're still submitting on the 30th, right?
well, I mean, if we come back and 3 floors doesn't work, 4 floors doesn't work, then we gotta come back and rethink at least the racket club and the groceries side. The problem with the downtown sites, if you're developers, are just too small. So we put the provision in that, you can't combine the sites. I mean, you could buy 3 parcels, but you have to build separate buildings.
Right, and that keeps the.
And that
preserves
keeps the
symmetry.
scale that, I mean, you're just not gonna.
This is what's being proposed in San Anselmo right now, in a very skinny. small
On
site.
what,
On San Anselmo Avenue,
There's
Yeah.
probably no elevator,
It's very
3
skinny.
floors, yeah.
little tiny lot, just, things happen
Yeah.
in small sites too.
They do, but they're less impactful because I think, no one's really gonna look at the building like that. It's the rhythm of the buildings as you walk down the street that makes the difference. So the architecture is kind of.
And to be honest. I love Larkspur downtown, but it has some pretty ordinary buildings.
Yeah.
That, I wouldn't mind if
they
somebody,
were 100 years old.
I know, they're old. That's all you can say about it.
It's the parking lots behind those buildings. That's the opportunity.
I think too, also Gabe, to your point that if we make them too restrictive, then we don't allow options for building age-friendly structures that have accessibility and have opportunities for some of our community members to live in the downtown area and age in place.
Yeah.
Because they have structures that are compatible with their needs for mobility and for outdoor space and for accessibility to our restaurants and things. So I kind of feel like we need to balance that too.
How would you feel if the study came back and said they need 5 stories at the racquetball club to be profitable?
Well, it would depend on what it looks like, I think, in many ways, there are 5-story buildings that, I'm not an engineer or architect, that aesthetically, and Brock taught me this years ago, can have setbacks to them in
You
areas in
can do
which
things.
you can configure them in different
But the
ways.
question is, how do we retain some control to?
That's the
to-
control.
to
Make that happen.
To make that happen.
And I'm feeling like you, the people, it's from North Magnolia.
Yeah,
I mean-
that will begin with David and Ryan.
We're already in process.
Yeah.
drawing up the racquetball.
This will be drawing it up according to the odds, and then that gets given to.
That would be
Kate.
helpful, yeah.
Yeah. But I think that needs to factor in too, that we have a lot of our residents who want to move to those age 55 condos because they want to live in a walkable community. They want to have bigger, wider doors, maybe an elevator
And
that
an
helps them
elevator,
access.
elevator.
Yeah,
makes
And
sense
we
in your
have
house.
an aging
We
population.
do, we have a significantly. aging
Not me, of
population.
course.
Well, many
I'm old
communities,
enough to know.
many communities in all these new buildings, they're putting in at least wheelchair accessible buildings on the first floor, or units on the first floor. That, this is Petaluma, one of the first cities that required that, I think, for accessibility for the first floor of many developments.
If you don't have an elevator, a certain percentage have to be accessible. units that
Yes.
Have to be accessible from the ground floor, so.
Yeah,
Elise, do we have anybody who?
That's a
is in the
question?
Audience?
There is one attendee, yes.
Gabe was number 2.
There was the second one.
Oh,
I was just thinking, at some point. we-
Want to open to see if anyone has any comments.
Was it, Andy, did you have something you were presenting?
About-
Timeline.
Yes.
Read, so I don't know if you need me to read it to you, yeah.
And then, so in between now and the planning commission meeting, we have to draft an ordinance because all of this has to be consistent with the central Larkspur specific plan. This has to be consistent with the current general plan because we don't have a new general plan yet. Has to be consistent with the downtown specific plan. So there'll need to be a resolution to incorporate changes because those all allow just 2-story structures.
it's all work.
And then also make some determinations about or as he said, will we give developers an out to go through the discretionary process,
Yeah,
which I think has some legal issues. But that, so Cord Madera did that, other people haven't done that. But it might make some sense to do that, because if someone already has an existing structure and they're just doing an addition, how are we gonna apply it? And there's some,
so it's a legal issue, it would be if a developer says, just a second, the constraints of your odds are such that you're forcing me to go to a discretionary hearing. And then goes to court saying, well, you really don't have the right to do that. And the only reason we're in a discretionary hearing is because you designed the odds to be so restrictive that it becomes impossible for us. Is that the kind of scenario that you would predict in the case of Cord Madera?
yeah, well, I think there was some issue about allowing an out that, and I don't know exactly what the issue is, but I've heard there's an issue with allowing an out, but that could be the issue. Yeah. But because in reality, if you have the odds, they could still ask for waivers to the standards. Even these objective standards, but there's more standards that they have to comply with.
Yeah.
Does this have, approval doesn't require it by September 30th, it's just submittal, right?
So we have to approve just some piece in order to get the grant funds.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to be, so the way we have it out on the timeline would be actually adopting this as our objective standards. So they would be adopted and by the 20th of September.
Sounds like that's
This is,
reasonable.
I mean, this has come a long way. That first.
It's
300 pages or whatever it was.
It's good to me.
Do you want to see if the audience members have comments?
Yeah.
Please raise your hand if you're in the audience and you want to comment. No one has their hand raised? Okay, there's no hands raised. Do we have a name?
That's, I think.
So did you have more? I mean, so that we're gonna try to develop some economic, or see if they're economically feasible, because that's what we need to demonstrate to the state that we're not constraining development. I mean, so that this is to try to pass that test.
And I'll say in that vein, we're trying to show that it's more than townhouses.
It's more than,
Townhouses.
yeah, for sure.
Townhouses, you could build all day, and the developer would love it and make a ton of money, but it doesn't help you guys out.
No.
Yeah.
And then it'll also help answer the question, when you start considering the housing element, or the public and planning commission and city council. Is it because our current limit is 21 units an acre in most of these districts, and is that not feasible? So hopefully it'll give us, because if we find that we don't need that many units and we could keep our zoning the same, that takes a lot off our
So 20 units an acre is townhouse, that's like the upper end, so. 21, you could probably get some guy to probably figure out a townhouse for that. Just,
Well, what's the matter with the townhouse?
I mean, townhouses are great, they sell great, they're unlikely to be affordable, and they don't get you, in terms of housing creation, which of course is the point of the housing.
I see.
They're very low density and they also, they don't help with, folks who need accessible units.
Yes.
Very vertical then.
Right, okay.
I mean, townhouses are the thing that is best to build right now in the Bay Area. So, but I mean, once a townhouse is built, that site never comes back. So
Right, so
that's,
yeah, we're hoping for different product, different technology and diversity, especially because we are, because we've done such a great job with the affordable housing community designation application. So we're hoping to attract all kinds of grant money and therefore also nonprofit developers. And so we want to make sure that these sites are magnets for that.
Yeah, great idea.
Right, yeah.
We need that.
Can you remind me, we had looked at transit friendly, transit oriented and pro, and I think we dropped one, did we drop the
Oh.
transit?
So in terms of policies,
Yeah,
there's the ABAG has a transit oriented communities policy, and we would have to allow for 300% office ratio in the Larkspur land or everywhere within half mile of transit. And I don't know that would be something the community wants. So to do 300% office or to allow 300% office. And then residential on top of that, and that's a lot. I think that's a lot for our community.
Because this was back,
But we have to do a whole environmental impact.
That's a
report to
stationary
see
plan
if
all
it's-
over again.
you know,
I don't even know if that it would have, and because we want housing, it seems backwards to provide that much incentive for office space. The alternative was we could preclude office space and then we'd be okay, we just have non-conforming offices there. But that was the big deal breaker for that, I don't know that we're gonna pursue it because it's just to rezone for 300% office space is a lot.
so I think we had talked earlier, like there were all these different policy options and so that one was not really pursued, but the pro was. And that's part of this, like if we submit September 30th, that would be the grant money that we may win based on our odds and our housing element.
That's the SB2 funding
Oh, yeah,
for
there's so
the
many-
odds.
so many things going
Yeah,
on.
there's so many different things happening at the same time.
Okay,
But
The pro housing designation is just continuing, we still have to get some additional points in order to come to be eligible.
and the designation
I see.
can't happen until the housing element is certified. But hopefully we'll have everything lined up so that your programs and policies aren't anything that need to be amended for that designation to occur. That's why
so SB2 could be for affordability, that's imminent
SB2 is for odds,
for odds. Oh, and
and that's September 30th. That's the deadline for adoption, but it could be, partial adoption or it could be adoption knowing that things may change and we could do it.
Daniel needs to go at some point.
I have to excuse me.
Thanks.
We'll see you, I'll see you on
See them at.
a path. Yes.
yeah,
You want you
So
want
it would be
the
great if you could make a recommendation on the document, whatever
move
you feel
forward.
comfortable moving forward, that would be really useful. You feel comfortable moving
Yeah,
forward?
I do. I had one quick question, because it's just, what's the facade zone?
Facade zone is basically the frontage area, so it's the primary frontage.
It's just-
area. Yeah,
Okay. That's what I thought, but
that's an opticus language.
So I feel comfortable moving forward with this document as it is. I think we've had a robust conversation and I appreciate that Neil and Brock have seen it evolve over the course of the last 10 months and are confident in it. So as my architectural expert here.
I've got great comments, and I think it's been really helpful.
Yeah.
Going through this. with everybody.
I think it's probably not ideal in the perfect way, but at least it's a document that will give us a lot more opportunity to help direct design, which we haven't really had, so.
This should help make sure that development that applies under these laws are in the scale
Right.
that is similar, and I think that's the most critical.
And I think, Gabe and I have lived through a very robust debate about affordability and housing and rentals. And part of the conundrum is we don't have enough. And I think we need to have a workshop or a workbook that is conducive with our look and feel. But it's also a workable spot so that someone who wants to come in and build housing will have the opportunity. Because we can't say no, we can't keep saying no.
yeah, fair enough. And then the parts, so the next time Catherine and I would be involved would be September 6th.
What comes to council.
Yeah, when it comes to council.
Which is a big night because you have the rent control item on that meeting,
But it's a collaborative situation, and we have to look at this and planning housing.
it's part of the
Yeah.
same topic.
It's if it passes planning, which we
Right,
would. so.
Right. And the staff report would show, essentially how it integrates with the class and how it's going to
Right.
work with the general plan. And I mean, I'm assuming that this is really so specific that the class, I think, set general parameters and this is, I mean, is there gonna be a lot that's just deleted from the class because it's superseded by this?
I don't think so.
I need to let you comment on these
Yeah,
things.
when I read through it, it was mostly just tweaking, the class sets out, the maximum allowed stories and buildings, it's just.
It's not very specific.
I don't think it's gonna be a complete rewrite of the
And
document.
I was envisioning more having,
It's a
instead
very
of something that says, that says this, the development has to be consistent with adopted objective standards. or something too.
The time flies whether you're having fun or not.
It's also a 30-year-old document too, so.
So I think we're good, right?
So someone could make a motion, that would be great.
Yeah, so moved. Yeah, I agree.
To recommend.
Yeah, I mean, I've stated my concerns. I think the whole group knows them, but as a practical matter.
Second James. So moved.
Okay, and
From Dover.
I'll just take a roll call. Catherine Way,
Yes.
Dave Paulson,
Yes,
Daniel Counselor is absent, and Brock Rockstep.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good work, Elise and
Thank
team.
Yeah, really.
A lot of work by the team.
yes, thanks, guys. Thanks for, yeah.
We still.
More work to go.
Yeah, the first time we saw this guy was like in some dark tunnel, some country.
Yeah.
That's where I'm headed. I'm headed
So
to-
Elise,
Is there, yeah, there's,
That's why I
the
have
only last, there's last thing for public comment for items that aren't on the agenda. If anyone has a public comment, raise their hand for that. And then otherwise we could adjourn the meeting.
Yeah, no hands raised.
and the next step for this committee will be,
Oh, to look at the how, hopefully we'll be looking at the housing element. Maybe we could set up a meeting and talk about sites if you think that's important, unless we just have that discussion. Well, as we do the next draft,
Yeah, that's,
bring them back the next draft.
well, let's ask.
Yeah, that's a good
Here,
question.
how involved do you want to be with, talking about, we've recognized some sites probably need to drop. There's one that dropped and then looks like it's coming back. Do you want to be engaged in that conversation before we, integrate it in with the next draft? For HCD?
I don't think they need to be honest.
because it's only limited.
Because
Yeah.
we're only eliminating things, not adding new things. Well, we could, yeah, I mean, I think, and
Or
As
you
long as
can,
we're
or you
leaving the
can
numbers.
just, you know.
It might be interesting to think about it. I mean, if there's a little executive
Yeah.
summary, you know, because all of these details that
Yeah.
start forming a more of a picture. So I mean, it doesn't seem.
and when it drops off the housing element, it doesn't mean it can't be developed with housing. It's just some of them are just harder to justify to HCD that housing will be developed there, so.
And like you were saying, Catherine, I mean, just the, you know, and brought to the North Magnolia winter, I mean, I find some of these details and, you know, understanding the interlayers of the legislation is gonna be very helpful if this comes up.
Yeah.
So let's say that, you know, Masonic is the exact same thing, exact same neighbors, you know, I feel it will be a different, you know, council meeting.
Well, now we have we would have a document that
And
outlines.
you know
our
why and
disputes.
where it might go. And so
Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, that sounds spot on.
thank you,
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, meeting adjourned. Good work.